President Biden announced today a new target for EV sales of 50% of total auto sales by 2030. Now, this is where the industry was going anyway, but the federal government is now signed on with a number of programs, and this is a big deal. The automakers were part of the announcement. It's a very much a strategic move on behalf of the government and the industry, and I'm going to talk to Sam Abuelsamid, who's an EV analyst and engineer with Guidehouse Insights. So welcome to the interview, Sam.
Good to be with you again, Markham.
Now, look, I know that the industry was going this way already, but this struck me as really this is a big deal for the White House and for the Biden administration.
Yeah, so what we got today was somewhat of a formalization of the product direction that most of the industry was already going in. What they did was they set a target. So this is not a hard and fast mandate as what we've seen, for example, from California, where they're saying they want to have no internal combustion engine vehicles sold after 2035. But this is setting a target of 40 to 50% of new vehicle sales by 2030 being electric vehicles. Now, there is a caveat there. This number does include plug-in hybrids. It's not just battery electrics. But the major automakers have been indicating that they're targeting having somewhere in that range, even just for battery electric vehicles, not including plug-in hybrids. And our own forecasts at Guidehouse projecting that out of all plug-in vehicle sales by the end of the decade, it's going to be a roughly 4-to-1 ratio of battery electric to plug-in hybrids. So we expect plug-in hybrids to be a very small percentage of that.
Now, to shift from internal combustion engine vehicles over to electric vehicles requires more than just substituting, an EV for an ICE in your driveway. There's charging infrastructure, there's a grid infrastructure, there are a host of other things, and I think that was part of the administration's announcement today.
Yeah, so as part of this executive order, I haven't actually had a chance to look at the actual text of the order, only the fact sheet that they published, because the order hasn't yet been published to the Federal Register here, which makes it official. But based on the fact sheet, they plan to have support for building out more EV charging infrastructure, which is going to be critically important, and also making a shift in the purchase incentives for EVs, moving away from the current system of tax credits that you claim on your subsequent year's tax return. So if you buy an EV in 2021, on your tax return next year, you can claim a tax credit of up to $7,500. They want to move to a point of purchase rebate system, which would actually be a lot better, particularly for more mainstream consumers, because what that does is it actually reduces the price at the time you make the purchase. So instead of paying $45,000 for an EV today and having to make the payments on a $45,000 car and then hopefully getting $7,500 back next year, you would actually be buying a $37,500 car and having subsequently lower monthly payments. And that's really important for a lot of consumers. A lot of consumers make their purchase decisions based on what their monthly payment is and whether they can afford that within their budget. The other part, the EV charging, is also going to be really important as we expand the fleet of EVs, because the reality is that most consumers never actually buy new cars. Here in the U.S., it's roughly about a 3.5-to-1 ratio of sales of used cars every year to new cars. So in a good year, if we sell 17 million cars, 17 million new cars, you're looking at somewhere in the neighborhood of about 60 to 70 million used car sales. And as these new EVs, as they get a few years on them, and the customers that do buy new cars, you move on to the next generation, those used cars, those EVs are going to go into the used car fleet. And those are the customers, those used car buyers are the ones who are less likely to live somewhere where they have access to off-street parking and ability to charge at home. So they are going to be more likely to be dependent on public charging infrastructure. So expanding the availability of public charging infrastructure is going to be really critical to support those drivers to be able to make the transition to EVs.
What other kinds of support are included in the in today's announcement, Sam?
There again, not a whole lot of details that I've seen available yet because they haven't published the full text of the executive order. But the other main aspect of what was announced today was a reversal of the Trump administration policy on CO2 emission standards and fuel economy. Um, and so what they're during the during 2020, the Trump administration rolled back the plan to get to corporate average fuel economy of 54.5 miles per gallon by 2025. They rolled that back to 40 miles per gallon. This new policy directs EPA and NHTSA, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, to roll back most of that change. It's not quite 100%. So instead of 54.5 miles per gallon by 2025, the new target is going to be 52 miles per gallon fleet average by 2026, and then continuing to increase it beyond that. To essentially make it more and more difficult to achieve that with internal combustion vehicles. So your manufacturers are basically going to have to go to electrification to achieve those new goals.
Now, I know that Guidehouse does EV forecasts like other forecasters like Bloomberg NEF do, and so I'm going to ask you to look.
I've never heard of them.
I'm going to ask you to gaze into your crystal ball and look a few years out and say, well, look, we've had a tremendous amount of change in the industry in about the last 18 to 24 months. And it just seems to me that this change is not going to stop. The announcements will keep on coming. What more might we look for from the industry itself and government to support it?
So, the big thing is we've talked about in previous conversations is as the industry is scaling up the shift towards electric vehicles, they're going to be launching a lot of new electric models. They are retooling their plants to make that transition to electric vehicles from internal combustion. So a lot of their existing plants today are making engines and transmissions. They are going to get either shut down or repurposed to start making electric motors, to make batteries, cells. And the industry is investing heavily in directly into production, particularly for cells, for the battery packs and the motors. And I think one of the things that we're likely to see as part of this package that comes out of this executive order is perhaps a new emphasis on the advanced technology vehicle manufacturing program that was actually launched initially came out of the 2007 energy bill under the George W. Bush administration. So that was the loan package that gave money to a number of companies, including Tesla, that helped them get going with Model S production. That has actually been revitalized this year. That basically during the last, actually, I think the last time they actually gave out any loans from that program was about 7 years ago, 6 or 7 years ago. Nothing was done during the Trump administration. They've actually brought in a number of people into that office to start evaluating these loan applications. And they're going to start granting those loans again. So I think we're going to see some money from that get fed out both to startup manufacturers as well as to some of the existing automakers to help them finance the transition for their manufacturing facilities to produce these new technology vehicles.
Final question, Sam. We're not talking a lot about what happens to the existing industry from the communities, the dealerships, the gas stations, service stations, those sorts of things. Are there any plans in the industry on how they're going to grapple with that?
Yeah, that's a big challenge. Certainly for dealers, the shift to electrification is going to be a major challenge because they're over time they're going to lose a big part of their revenue base, which is in service on vehicles. I mean, there'll still be warranty work that needs to be done, and various things like replacing tires and doing suspension alignments, fixing suspension systems that get damaged from hitting potholes. But things like oil changes and engine maintenance, that business is going to go away. So they're going to have to refocus on other areas. I wouldn't be surprised to see some dealers will probably end up going away. Others will perhaps do things like add public charging stations. They've got real estate to work with. Set up charging stations. Same thing for gas stations, for petrol stations. Putting up. We're already seeing a number of gas stations in various countries that are installing EV chargers, and I think we'll see an expansion of that. Some of the big oil companies, particularly Shell and BP, have acquired or invested in charging networks in Europe and in the UK, and I would expect to see them get more involved in that here as well, to help their stations and their franchisees to install charging infrastructure, because that infrastructure, those chargers have to go somewhere, and if you have a reduction in demand for liquid fuels, you can take out some of those pumps, replace those with chargers. So there's some opportunities there to transition the business over time.
Well, Sam, thank you very much for this. Always appreciate your insights.
Always happy to talk to you.